What if I told you that Blake Lively's desperate fight to silence her critics has just taken a terrifying new turn, one that could shake Hollywood to its core and even taint the very jury deciding her fate tonight? We dive into the shocking truth. Behind the courtroom chaos, the haunted secrets, and the political storm no one saw coming. The story begins with a chilling sense of unease as Blake Lively launches an extraordinary attempt to reshape the narrative around her crumbling reputation, demanding sanctions against Justin Baldoni's attorneys and claiming that every word, every phrase, every soundbite has been twisted into a calculated effort to poison the minds of a potential jury pool. And as this legal drama unfolds, it becomes impossible to ignore the weight of her accusations because in her 15-page reply brief, she paints a picture of herself as the victim of a relentless media campaign orchestrated not by random critics, but by the very people sworn to uphold the integrity of the court. Yet what makes this moment so electrifying is not merely the legal maneuvering, but the sense that something much darker is at play. Because when a celebrity of Lively's stature insists that her character has been shredded, by design, that her very identity has been branded privileged, arrogant, narcissistic, and incapable of accountability. She is not simply arguing law, she is waging war over perception, and the battlefield is nothing less than the collective consciousness of millions watching from the sidelines and wondering how far truth can be bent before it snaps in two. And yet while her attorneys speak of prejudice and fairness, the world outside the courthouse moves with unsettling speed. Matt Rife, a comedian, worth $50 million, casually purchases the real-life Conjuring house, a property so drenched in stories of demons and darkness that even Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, the stars who once portrayed ghost hunters in the Conjuring films, recoil in nervous laughter when asked what they think of his decision, saying, "Only don't do it," as if even uttering the words could summon the very horrors that made the house infamous. And as bizarre as it sounds, this haunted subplot mirrors the haunted feeling in Blake Lively's own saga, because just like the cursed artifacts of the Warrens' home, she too seems chained to relics of her past that she cannot escape. And while the world marvels at the absurdity of a comedian buying a house of demons, the far more haunting spectacle is the idea that a jury pool can be haunted. Too haunted not by spirits, but by narratives whispered on podcasts, scattered across TikTok, and echoed by YouTubers whose only crime may be expressing an opinion, yet now stand accused of colluding in a campaign of hate. But what if this isn't simply about collusion? What if the true story is the desperate scramble of a powerful figure grasping at every possible shield to explain away the thunderous crash of a reputation collapsing under its own contradictions? And when we hear Lively's lawyers argue that Brian Friedman, Justin Baldoni's sharp-tongued attorney, has gone too far by calling her a liar, arrogant, elite, narcissistic, we are forced to ask, is the crime the words themselves, or the uncomfortable possibility that those words may resonate with an audience already primed to believe them? Because Friedman has not hidden his disdain. He has called her out in podcasts and interviews, weaving a narrative of a woman blinded by privilege and unwilling to face consequences. And now, in the starkest of terms, she insists that his words alone may destroy her chances at justice, as though justice is a fragile candle flickering in a storm of sound bites. But justice is not the only thing flickering here, for even as Blake Lively demands punishment for the man she accuses of misconduct, the world outside is writhing with its own tales of transformation. Cracker Barrel, once a symbol of roadside nostalgia, is accused of betraying its own heritage with a sterile rebrand, and furious patrons rant outside its doors, lamenting even the alteration of a simple peg game. And though the outrage seems absurd compared to the weight of courtroom battles, it serves as a haunting reminder of how fragile memory and tradition can be when corporate greed or desperate reinvention collide with the deep hunger for familiarity, and so the parallel grows stronger. Blake Lively, like Cracker Barrel, is fighting to preserve a brand, a carefully curated identity built on nostalgia and warmth, now under siege by accusations of artificiality, manipulation, and betrayal. And just as Cracker Barrel's critics scream that the heart has been ripped from the restaurant, Lively's attorneys argue that her heart, her humanity, her credibility is being ripped from her by attorneys who play fast and loose with public commentary. And as we weave between these stories, the line between branding and truth, between reimagining and erasing, becomes terrifyingly thin. Because whether it is a restaurant, a haunted house, or a Hollywood star, the battle is always over. Perception once lost is nearly impossible to regain. And so the Tension builds with every revelation, every side story, every voice crying out that something they loved has been desecrated until the audience can no longer separate nostalgia from nightmare, nor legal maneuver from ghostly whisper. The silence that followed the first wave of revelations was only temporary because if part 1 was the ignition, then part 2 is the explosion. And this is where everything becomes much darker, much heavier, and far more difficult to untangle because the web is no longer just about whispers and rumors. It is about verifiable documentation, sealed court filings, and insiders who have now begun to expose the rotten underside of Hollywood politics and celebrity protectionism. And in this unfolding chapter, what makes it even more terrifying is not just what is being revealed, but how quickly those at the top scramble to cover their tracks and silence those who dare to challenge them. And at the center of this chaos, Blake Lively finds herself cornered, not only by her own actions, but by the mounting evidence that keeps surfacing, despite her team's frantic attempts to bury it. The whispers about Taylor Swift's leaked texts become screams. The legal filings once hidden behind protective orders are suddenly pushed into public awareness, and Justin Baldoni's persistence in demanding transparency turns from a lone crusade into a tidal wave of scrutiny that Hollywood itself can no longer ignore. The story morphs into something larger than a courtroom battle. It becomes a referendum on how much corruption, manipulation, and betrayal can be tolerated in an industry built on illusion and power. And with every passing day, new fragments of communication, leak emails, texts, recorded calls. They spill into the narrative, painting an image of an alliance that was never as solid as the red carpet smile suggested. Taylor Swift, whose texts were supposed to remain sealed, is suddenly weaponized as both a victim and a potential witness. Her words, once meant for private conversations, now recirculated in courtrooms and gossip columns alike, making her not just a superstar, but a key figure in a case that could redefine what privacy means for celebrities, the legal experts weighing. And describe this as unprecedented, noting that rarely does a judge force the hand of Hollywood elites the way this one has. But the drama goes beyond law because this is about reputations, livelihoods, and the public's hunger for truth. And in this chapter, the suspense is unbearable. Will Blake Lively's carefully crafted persona survive when cracks in the facade widen into canyons? Will Ryan Reynolds stand firm beside her when whispers of his own involvement begin to bubble up? And perhaps, most importantly, will the media finally shift its loyalty from protecting the powerful to holding them accountable? The answer lies not just in the legal strategies unfolding, but in the unseen battles taking place in boardrooms and studios across Los Angeles, where calls are made to control headlines, where publicists negotiate to spin scandals into redemption arcs, and where silence is bought with favors and promises. But in this story, the silence is no longer holding. The leaks keep pouring. The narratives keep collapsing, and the truth that was once hidden in shadows now threatens to set the entire stage ablaze. Now, as the courtroom battles reached their most pivotal and fiery moments, the entire legal confrontation between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni transformed from a private dispute into a public spectacle that seemed to consume the entertainment industry, and every passing day brought with it new revelations, startling leaks, and fiery reactions from fans and insiders alike. And this was not just another celebrity scandal. This was a profound clash of egos, reputations, and immense financial stakes, with Taylor Swift's leaked texts serving as both fuel and evidence that carried shockwaves across Hollywood. And those who had initially dismissed the seriousness of this trial quickly found themselves reevaluating as new filings suggested that the accusations were far more layered than anyone could have foreseen, because beyond the carefully crafted PR statements, beyond the polished smiles on red carpets, and beyond the rehearsed interviews, there existed an underbelly of betrayal, whispered conversations, and carefully guarded secrets. And the legal documents began to reveal that Blake Lively's strategy to discredit Baldoni relied heavily on selective narratives and controlled leaks. But the dam had broken, and the public was now witnessing fragments of a much darker story. And as media outlets scrambled to report every angle of the case, the responses grew more intense, with some declaring that this could be the downfall of Blake's carefully maintained reputation, while others insisted that Baldoni was risking everything by pushing too aggressively. Yet one undeniable truth surfaced again and again. Taylor Swift's role in these leaks, whether intentional or collateral, was now the gravitational center pulling every headline back to her name, and with her fan base known for their relentless loyalty, the stakes of alienating or being aligned with her words grew increasingly dangerous for everyone involved. and Ryan Reynolds, who had once remained publicly supportive of his wife, suddenly found his every move scrutinized, with rumors swirling about tension within their marriage as questions of loyalty, truth, and strategy loomed over the lively Reynolds household, and even Hugh Jackman, a friend long tied to both Blake and Ryan, began to distance himself with subtle public cues, as though Hollywood itself had decided that standing too close to this inferno might result in reputational burns. And through it all, Justin Baldoni remained steady, almost calculating, as if he had anticipated every twist and was waiting for the precise moment to unleash his most devastating evidence. And legal experts analyzing the case on nightly panels emphasized that the credibility battle was now everything. If the jury believed that Blake had intentionally manipulated narratives to paint Baldoni in a damaging light, then the financial penalties could be catastrophic. But perhaps even worse was the looming possibility of permanent damage to her career. Because in Hollywood, the loss of public favor can be more lethal than any financial fine. And this possibility seemed to hang like a guillotine over every courtroom exchange and every leaked email and every whispered testimony. And the deeper one looked, the clearer it became that this was no longer just a lawsuit. This was an unraveling of power structures where friendships, alliances, and celebrity influence were being tested in ways few could have imagined. The walls of Hollywood power began to shake under the weight of whispers that refused to die down, because even as denials and statements were issued, the undercurrent of doubt only grew stronger and stronger with each new headline and each new piece of speculation that found its way into the bloodstream of the internet. The fascination was not just with what might be revealed, but with the stark realization that the people so carefully protected by agents, managers, publicists, and lawyers could actually be vulnerable, and that very vulnerability created a raw, almost electric energy that captivated audiences across the globe. And in this moment, the name of Blake Lively became a symbol not just of glamour, but of potential downfall. Because in the eyes of the public, she was no longer untouchable. She was no longer shielded by perfect, curated images. She was now a player in a dangerous game of legal maneuvers, leaked messages, and shattered illusions. And when Taylor Swift's name was thrown into the fire, the storm amplified to levels unseen before, because Swift is not only a global superstar, she is also a cultural force whose voice carries power, and whose silence speaks even louder. So the very idea that her private exchanges could become evidence in a courtroom sent shockwaves that rattled not just the entertainment press, but mainstream outlets that typically avoided the celebrity gossip sphere. Suddenly, Wall Street analysts were speculating about the impact this scandal could have on streaming services, studios, and brand endorsements tied to these celebrities. Suddenly, politicians were weighing in on privacy rights in the digital age, because the case represented something larger than two stars at war. It became a referendum on fame, power, and accountability. And through all of this, the tension refused to release its grip on the audience, who found themselves unable to look away from the unraveling drama, as if each detail, each headline, each whispered rumor carried the promise of unlocking the true story hiding beneath the polished surface. And the haunting part was that nobody, not even those closest to the players, knew just how deep the rabbit hole went. Whispers began suggesting that old friends were now being pulled into the vortex, that allies were reconsidering their loyalties, and that rivalries were hardening into something darker, more permanent. And when insiders claimed that private dinners in Beverly Hills had turned into interrogation sessions, with lawyers pressing witnesses about what they had seen and heard, the sense of unease became almost unbearable, because this was no longer a story about one actress or one director or one superstar. This was a full-blown cultural earthquake that threatened to split the industry in half, with one side determined to defend its icons and another side eager to watch them fall. And for the public, there was only one question that mattered: what truth was worth sacrificing for the sake of survival? And who among these powerful figures would be willing to burn bridges, friendships, and reputations just to cling to a throne that seemed shakier by the day? As headlines poured out of courtrooms and social media exploded with theories, the sense of suspense became suffocating, because audiences knew that something devastating was coming. But nobody could predict who would emerge from the wreckage with their career intact, and who would be remembered as the tragic casualty of a scandal that refused to die. As we reach the end of this unfolding storm, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Hollywood has been shaken in ways it has not seen in decades. Reputations are collapsing, friendships are dissolving, alliances once thought unbreakable are turning into ashes, and the audience around the world is watching in disbelief. The Blake Lively Taylor Swift Justin Baldoni saga is no longer just a courtroom dispute. It has become a mirror reflecting everything that is broken in the world of fame, power, and influence. Every leaked text, every court document, and every desperate move made in front of cameras pushes the story into darker territory. And while Blake fights to maintain control, the silence from Taylor and the measured calm from Baldoni are speaking louder than any scripted statement. The whispers in the corridors of power are now thundering into headlines, and the public has begun to realize that the carefully crafted Hollywood machine is showing its cracks. The courtroom has turned into a stage where the performances are not rehearsed and the stakes are not awards, but legacies. The fallout is already spreading across the industry. Insiders are distancing themselves, studios are quietly reevaluating their partnerships, and fans who once screamed in admiration are now shouting in anger. What was once celebrity worship has become a trial of accountability, and what was once private betrayal has transformed into public humiliation. Blake Lively has been forced to reckon with the consequences of choices that seemed small at the time but are now shaking her empire at its foundation. This is not the ending of the story. It is the beginning of a much bigger reckoning. Hollywood will never be the same after this. The curtain has been pulled back, and behind the glitter and fame, the truth is darker, heavier, and far more dangerous than anyone dared to believe.